Hello friends, how are you? I hope you are fine. So today I'm going to read the Indian Express article on explain page. So here we go. What the G7 corporate tax deal means for India. The deal announced Saturday involving the US, the UK, Germany, France, Canada, Italy and Japan is likely to put before a G20 meeting in July. Advanced economies making up the G7 grouping have reached a historic deal on taxing multinational companies. Finance ministers meeting in London agreed to counter tax avoidance through measures to make companies pay in the countries where they do business. They also agreed in the principle to ratify a global minimum corporate tax rate to counter the possibility of countries undercutting each other to attract investments. The deal announced Saturday involving the US, the UK, Germany, France, Canada, Italy, and Japan is likely to be put before a G20 meeting in July. What are the decisions taken? The first decision that has been ratified is to force multinationals to pay taxes where they operate. The second decision in the agreement commits states to a global minimum corporate tax rate of 15% to avoid countries undercutting each other. The agreement will now be discussed in detail at a meeting of G20 financial ministers and central bank governors in July. We commit to reaching an equitable solutions on the allocation of taxing rights with the market countries awarded taxing rights on at least the 20% of profit exceeding a 20% margin for the largest and the most profitable multinational enterprises. We will provide for the appropriate coordination between the application of the new international tax rules and the removal of all the digital services taxes and other relevant similar measures on all companies. We also commit to a global minimum tax of at least 15% on a country by country basis. We agree on the importance of progressing agreement in parallel on both pillars and look forward to reaching an agreement at the July meeting of G20 finance minister and central bank governors. The G7 finance ministers and central bank governors communique said. Why the minimum rate? The decision to ratify a 15% floor rate follows from a declaration of war on low tax jurisdictions around the globe announced by the US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, who had argued the world's 20 advanced nations to move in the direction of adopting a minimum global corporate income tax in April. She said in a virtual speech to the Chicago Council on Global Affairs that the move to put a minimum rate in place attempted to reverse a 30-year race to the bottom in which countries have resorted to slashing corporate tax rates to attract multinational corporations. The US proposal had proposed a higher 21% minimum corporate tax rate coupled with the cancelling the exemptions on income from countries that do not legislate a minimum tax to discourage the shifting of multinational operations and profits overseas. One of the reasons the US push for this is a purely domestic. It aims to somewhat offset any disadvantages that might arise from the Biden administration's proposed increase in the US corporate tax rate. The proposed increase to 28% from 21% would partially reverse the previous Trump administration's cut in tax rates on companies from 35% to 21% by way of a 2017 tax legislation. More importantly, the US proposal includes an increase to the minimum tax that was included in the Trump administration's tax legislation from 10.5% to 21%, the benchmark minimum corporate tax rate that Yellen has propounded for other G20 countries. This increase comes at a time when the pandemic is costing governments across the world. A global pact on this issue, as enunciated by Yellen, works well for the US government at this time. The same holds true for most other countries in Western Europe, even as some low tax European jurisdictions such as the Netherlands, Ireland, and Luxembourg, and some in the Caribbean rely largely on tax rate arbitrage to attract MNCs. The proposal also has some degree of support from the IMF. While China is not likely to have a serious objections with the US call, an area of concern for Beijing would be the impact of such a tax stipulation on the Hong Kong, the seventh largest tax haven in the world and the largest in Asia, according to a study published earlier this year by the advocacy body Tax Justice Network. Plus, China's trade relationship with the US could be a deterrent in negotiations on a global tax deal. Who are the targets? Apart from the non-tax low tax jurisdictions, the proposal for minimum corporate tax are tailored to address the low effective rates of tax shelled out by some of the world's biggest corporations, including digital giants such as Apple, Alphabet, and Facebook, as well as the major corporations such as Nike, Starbucks. So these companies typically rely on complex webs of subsidiaries to hoover profits out of major markets into low tax countries such as Ireland or Caribbean nations such as British Virgin Islands or the Bahamas, or to the Central American nations such as Panama. The US Treasury loses nearly $50 billion a year to tax cheats, according to the Tax Justice Network report, with Germany and France also among the top losers. India's annual tax loss due to the corporate tax abuse is estimated at over $10 billion, according to the report. What are the problems with the plan? Apart from the challenges of getting all major nations on the same page, especially since this impinges on rights of the sovereign to decide a nation's tax policy, the proposal has other pitfalls. A global minimum rate would essentially take away a tool that countries use to push policies that suit them. For instance, in the backdrop of the pandemic, the IMF and World Bank data suggests that developing countries with a less ability to offer mega stimulus packages may experience a longer economic hangover than developed nations. A lower tax rate is a tool they can use to alternatively push economic activity. Also, a global minimum tax rate will do little to tackle tax evasion. Where does India stand? In a bid to revive the investment activity, the Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman on September 21, 2019 announced a sharp cut in the corporate taxes for domestic companies to 22% and for the new domestic manufacturing companies to 15%. The Taxation Laws Amendment Act 2019 resulted in the insertion of a section 115 BAA to the Income Tax Act 1961 to provide for the concessional tax rate of 22% for the existing domestic companies, subject to certain conditions, including that they do not avail of any specified incentive or deductions. Also, existing domestic companies opting for the concessional taxation regime will not be required to pay any minimum alternate tax. This, along with other the measures, was estimated to cost the exchequer rupees 1.45 lakh crore annually. The cuts effectively brought India's headlines corporate tax rate broadly at a par with the average 23% rate in Asian countries. China and South Korea have a tax rate of 25% each, while the Malaysia is at 24%, Vietnam at 20%, Thailand at 20%, and Singapore at 17%. The effective tax rate, inclusive of surcharge and cess, for Indian domestic companies is around 25.17%. While taxation is ultimately a sovereign function and depends upon the needs and circumstances of the nation, the government is open to participate and engage in the emerging discussions globally around the corporate tax structure. The economic division will look into the pros and cons of the new proposal as and when it comes, and the government will take a view thereafter, said a senior government official. The average corporate tax rate stands at around 29% for existing companies that are claiming some benefits or the other. Another official said New Delhi was proactively engaging with foreign governments with a view to facilitating and enhancing the exchange of information under the double taxation avoidance agreements, tax information exchange agreements, and multilateral convention to plug loopholes. Besides, effective enforcement actions, including expeditious investigation in foreign assets cases, have been launched, including searches, inquiries, levy of taxes, penalties, etc., and filing of prosecution complaints wherever applicable. To address the challenges posed by the enterprises who conduct their business through the digital means and carry out activities in the country remotely, The government has the equalization levy introduced in 2016 following a recommendation by a panel constituted to deliberate on taxation of the digital economy. Also, the IT Act has been amended to bring in the concept of significant economic presence for establishing business connection in the case of non-residents in India. Thank you very much.